Hi there, this is Heather of Shutterbug 101. Today we'll be going over a walkthrough of the Sony A9 Mark II and a lens comparison and review of the Sony 70-200 G Master 2.8 lens and the brand new Tamron 70-180 2.8 lens, its competitor. Let's get started. So we're going to start with the lens review before going over the walkthrough. So as you can tell just by looking at these guys, the Sony 70-200 2.8 and the Tamron 70-180, there's a pretty significant size difference there. Now, yeah, you might go, okay, but is that 20 millimeters worth of, size that's on top of that Sony? I guess. If you're considering 200 versus 180, but honestly, when we're considering the example pictures, there's a little bit of difference, a couple more feet, but overall, the fact that this is so much lighter and it's smaller than the Sony is pretty amazing. It's probably like, if I were to get the option to shoot either of these, I would be like, well, give me the lighter one, but I'm also one that's like, this sort of weight after so many hours of shooting can really cramp up your arms. Now, don't get me wrong, I have nothing against the G Master series. I love the G Master series. In fact, you do have more options on the G Master series. But if you're a hobbyist where you're not considering going professional, you just want great high quality images, none of the extra buttons and dials and all these things, or you're just like, I just want to shoot and get a great pic, the Tamron's going to be a great option for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a closer look at these guys. So if we look at the Tamron here, we can see that it says the 70-180 2.8 right in front. It does have a lock switch on this side here, which is going to prevent it from zooming when we have it face down. If we're walking with the camera face down, we don't want that barrel to slowly slide out, because after so much time, that barrel does loosen quite a bit. Now, Tamron does have a 6-year warranty on their lenses, so if that does happen, if it gets too loosey-goosey for you, you can just send it on back and they'll tighten that on up and make sure everything is in working order, do any firmware upgrades for you if you don't want to do it yourself. All that type of stuff is covered by that 6-year warranty, any technical aspects. But other than that, it's a pretty clean-cut lens. Like, there's no switches or anything on there. Versus the Sony here, if we take a look at this monster of a lens here, you can see right at the top of the lens here, below the focusing ring, you're actually going to see 1, 2, 3 buttons. Those buttons are actually going to be for shortcuts. So you can actually program shortcuts to the lens itself if you wanted to change ISO, if you wanted to change aperture on one, or your focusing, or whatever you wanted to change, you could program it to those buttons right on the lens so you don't have to fumble with the camera. What they also have here, they have 4 switches. So this switch here is going to be your autofocus to manual focus. Pretty self-explanatory, AF for autofocus, or if you want to manually focus it yourself with this top ring, that's what you're going to switch. You have your focusing distance, so you can do 3 meters to infinity. So if you know that your subject is over 3 meters out, you can tell the camera, hey, don't worry about anything 3 meters or closer, just focus on what's out there, and typically your focusing will be a bit quicker. Otherwise, you'll keep it on full. You have your optical steady shot, so this you can control right from the lens. You can turn it on or off. Now typically you would turn this off if it's on a tripod, due to the fact that the tripod is now doing all the stabilizing for you. And then you have 2 stabilizing modes. The first mode is going to be for regular handheld, versus the second mode, which is going to be for panning back and forth. It's going to be for more movement-wise of following that movement. In the end, the biggest difference I saw, of course, just looking at the lenses, size and weight, but also when taking the pictures, like I find with a lot of the Tamron versus name brand, is that there's more sharpness throughout the image on a name brand lens, versus the bokeh happens much more quickly on the Tamron. So you'll actually see that blurriness transition from sharp to blurry. You'll actually see that happen much more quickly with the Fuji, you'll actually see that happen much more quickly with the Tamron when it comes to zooming in and looking at the details. But I'll let you guys make the final choice, naturally. Along with telling you the features of the A9 Mark II, which is what I used for these lens comparison pictures, I'll let you go ahead and see the pictures side by side and let you make the final judgment. Either way, both are fantastic lenses. Sony naturally is going to future-proof you a little bit more because it is a G Master lens. They'll keep the firmware updated. It's going to be applicable for all future cameras versus the Tamron. Although they do keep their firmware updated and they stand by their products strongly, you know, there's a possibility that they could just stop updating the firmware. I don't anticipate it, but Sony does have that more of a guarantee if you're in it for the long run. Let's go ahead and get started on that A9 Mark II walkthrough. The Sony A9 Mark II is Sony's high-end 24 megapixel full-frame mirrorless camera that has built-in stabilization up to 5.5 stops, 693 focus points, and a tilting touch LCD screen. This camera has a continuous drive of 20 frames per second to help capture still motion shots of animals and sports, and speaking of animal and human subjects, has an amazing animal or human eye detection focus setting. The A9 Mark II can shoot 4K video up to 30 frames and 1080p HD video up to 120 frames for slow or quick motion video, has a microphone port and a headphone port. It also has a dual card slot where both are UHS 2 compatible, has USB charging for on the go, has Wi-Fi ability, and is environmentally sealed, which goes to show this camera is up to any challenge you want to give it. Today we'll be going through the buttons, dials, and menus to help you navigate this camera a bit easier. So, the A9 Mark II. I gotta say, this camera just feels good in your hands. Like, it very well made. It has an amazing abilities to shoot at high speeds, to shoot in, you know, decently low light. I mean, and it'll let you print fairly large as well. So, I mean, this camera is like the master of Sony cameras right now. You know, it does everything that you need it to and more, which is pretty fantastic. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start covering this camera today. So as you can see on the front of the camera, the only button we have is going to be the one that releases the lens. So if you had a lens on this, you click and hold this down, you can rotate the lens, take it on off, and then you would line up the dot with the dot on the body here, and then turn it until it clicks. Now, because this is the cap, it's not going to click, but if you were putting a lens on it, you want to hear that confirmation click. We also have an infrared sensor here for a wireless infrared remote. And we also have an LED assist light when it comes to focusing available on the front of the lens as well. This is going to be one of our adjustment knobs to help us with shutter speed and aperture when it comes to those settings. As you can see on this side of the camera, we have a few doors to take a look at. So in this door here, you can see that we have some transferring options. So we have our port so we can transfer directly to the computer in a fast, quick, almost instantaneous way. We have our flash sync cable here. We have our door here, which is going to be, as you can see on the door itself, that's our mic port, our headphone port, and our HDMI port to connect it to a external screen. And of course, this guy here is actually going to be, you have a USB-C port for charging, or USB, but you also have a micro USB option if you would like to do that instead. Naturally, the USB-C is going to be much faster, so that's what's recommended, and that is the cord that comes in the box with it. On this side of the camera, you can see that we just have a single door here, so if we pop that open, you can see that we have 2 card slots. So here we have slot 1, slot 2, and both are UHS 2 compatible, meaning that when you use an SD card, it's actually going to have 2 sets of contacts versus the regular one. And you know which way to put it in when you can match up the card with that corner cut off with the picture on the door, and then that is going to click right back in there. On the bottom of the camera here, you can see that we have our universal tripod screw mount here. We also have our door that's going to give us our battery here, so you can take it out and charge it as needed. Going to the top of the camera here, you'll see that we have our on and off switch. That's going to be right here. This is going to be your shutter button. You push halfway down to focus, all the way down to take a picture. We're going to start with this dial here. So this dial does switch around here. Now you have manual focus, which is going to naturally be on the lens. You'll be able to manually focus it yourself, which you do need to push this button in order to turn it, by the way. Whoops. You have AFC, which is going to be autofocus continuous, which allows the camera to continually autofocus with movement like animals or sports. And then you have AFS, which is autofocus single, which allows the focusing to lock onto a specific subject that is still not moving, and the focus shouldn't move on you. So naturally, if you're taking pictures of moving subjects, you want to put it to AFC. Everything else, walking around, standard landscape, or people posing, AFS is going to be perfect for that. Then on the top here, this is going to be our drive dial. So the single square is going to be for single shots. So if you click and hold the shutter button down, it'll take one picture. Versus if you have the H on with the continuous frames, that's going to be the high speed continuous. That's going to be that 20 frames per second. Then you have medium and low. These, I believe, are programmable. Low, I believe, is going to be about, you can put it like 6 to 10 frames. Medium would be like 10 to 15 frames. Then you have the high, which is the really high speed, 20 frames per second, which is pretty incredible. Then we have our timer here, and then we have bracketing as well, all on this dial. We have our hot shoe for when you want to add a external flash to the top of this camera. It does not have a built-in flash, something to keep in mind. We have our mode dial here, which surprisingly does have an automatic mode, which I do find pretty surprising for something of this caliber of camera. So if you are brand new to Sony and you're jumping in with 2 feet and you're like, just give me the best of the best of the best, and you end up getting this camera and not really sure how it works quite yet, it's something brand new to you, shooting in auto is a great mode to be in, just adjusting to the dials and the buttons and what they do and what they're for. You have your program mode, which is going to be program auto. Essentially, it's auto, just gives you more control over changing things like your autofocus, where you're autofocusing, how you're autofocusing, your exposure, all of those things can be controlled in your program mode. Your A, or aperture mode, is going to control the aperture, of course, depending on the lens that you have. Either allowing you to get the nice blurry background, sharp foreground, or allowing you to let in as much light as possible in low light environments. You have the S mode, which is going to be your shutter speed mode. This allows you to capture action. You can either freeze motion or you can show motion. So if you were wanting to capture a bird in flight with the wings still, naturally you'd go up to a higher number, versus you want to get that nice smooth water effect over a waterfall, then you would go with the slower shutter speed. And of course is going to be your manual mode. This is going to give you full control over every setting in the camera. The camera's only doing what you tell it to, because in the S mode, you're choosing the shutter speed, but the camera's choosing the aperture. And the aperture mode, you're choosing the aperture while the camera chooses the shutter speed for you. So in P, A, and S mode, the camera is still assisting you in those ways, versus manual mode, you have full absolute control, but you do need to know your camera backwards and forwards in order to really know how to get the most out of your manual mode. And we have modes 1, 2, and 3. These are custom modes. The way that these would work is if you're shooting in a specific video setting, or you're shooting in studio where lighting very rarely changes, you can actually save your settings to 1, 2, and 3. That way, if you go out, you go on a walk, you want to take your camera with you, and you come back to wanting to continue to take pictures in the same lights, the same lit setting, you can just go back to 1, 2, or 3, and it's there for you, which is pretty fantastic. We have our video mode, which is of course going to be fully targeted at video. So you'll find that in this mode, the menu, the settings are all going to be directed toward adjusting your video settings. However, you can record video in your MSAP and even auto mode if you wanted to. You don't have to dial into the film strip mode in order to record video. All that's required is that you hit this red button here. Hit it one time to start recording, hit it again to stop recording. Pretty simple. And then in the S&Q, this is going to be your slow and quick video. So this will give you a fast option to do slow motion or speedy video, depending on the look that you want to go for. And for the rest of the video, I'm going to be showing you the settings and menus in the P mode. So if you're following along, just keep that in mind. In auto mode, it doesn't show you all of your options, which is why I'm in the P mode. So if you find, hey, I'm looking at my same A9 Mark II and I'm not seeing any of those menu settings, just make sure that you're at least in the P mode, and you should be seeing the same things that I am. We have your C1 and C2 buttons here. These are going to be shortcut buttons. So currently the C1 button is going to control white balance, which is just the temperature of your photo. And then the C2 button looks like that is going to control where you're focusing at, your focus area. So whether you want the entire area to be considered when focusing, if you want a specific zone, a specific area, or even a specific spot to be in focus, you can adjust all of that from the focus area button there. These are programmable, so if you're like, well, I rarely change my white balance off of auto white balance or whatever it is, then you can program these to be whatever you want. It's, you know, cameras these days are highly customizable, so keep that in mind. Here we have our exposure dial. Now, I do find that on the A7 cameras, my biggest thing is I'll accidentally hit this, or my customers will accidentally hit this. This has a lock button, so you know, you can click that down and it won't accidentally change on you. So it's a really nice feature on the A9 Mark II. And then of course we have another adjustment dial here, just like this one up front, that's going to adjust aperture, shutter speed, whatever it may be. In manual mode, one of these will do one, the other will do, of course, the other. Going to the back of the camera here. This is where the fun starts to happen. So we have a C3 button, so very similar to the C1 and C2 buttons on top here. This is also a custom button that has its own function here. This is going to change the type of shutter. So it has a mechanical and an electronic shutter on this camera. The electronic shutter allows you to take that 20 frames per second versus the manual shutter. So that's kind of the purpose of that. However, it's all up to you which one you want to use. Personally, I will just keep it in auto because I do a variety of things, so it'll switch from mechanical to electric when it finds that it's needed. But again, it's preference. This is probably something that I would switch to another function, something I would switch over more. Also, as with every camera, your universal exit button is going to be your shutter button halfway down if you ever find you're stuck in a menu. This is your menu button. We're going to go over that last. We have our viewfinder here, which does have a sensor. So if we put our face in front of that sensor, it's going to go ahead and turn that viewfinder on and turn the screen off. We have our record button, which we went over. We have our back button autofocus here. So if we click this button to focus instead of our shutter button halfway down, we could do that if you like that back button focus with your thumb better. This also doubles as a zoom button. Now, this isn't zooming to take a picture, this is zooming to look in at your pictures you've already taken and make sure it's in focus, make sure no one's blinking, that sort of thing. Here we have our AEL button. This is our auto exposure lock. So you can lock in lighting from a specific area, keep that held, and take the picture after you have locked in your exposure. So this would be very handy for a backlit subject. So someone standing in front of a backlit window, naturally indoors will always be lower light than outdoors during the day. So if you wanted to see that person's face very clearly, you could make sure that your focus point, or at least your metering, is on spot or center. You can hit this button right where their face is, recompose your picture, and then while you're holding that down still, take the shot, and you're going to be able to see their face very well. It may be really bright outside, but if your main focus was to see them, then that's all that matters. Then we have our joystick here, which is really neat. So if we have our flexible spot on when it comes to focus area, I can move my focus point around with this joystick, which I find extremely helpful. Otherwise, you could use your touch screen to move that around. Currently, I don't have it on, so I wouldn't worry too much about it at the moment. We have our function button. This is going to be our quick menu. So if we hit this button here, it does open up this whole sub menu on the screen. The default of this guy is going to start up at the top. So you have your drive mode, which of course is run by the dial on top. You have your focus area, which again is also one of your top C buttons up here. Your exposure compensation, which is this dial here. You have your ISO, which you can also change by pushing left on this dial here as well, which personally, if you're just adjusting to this camera, I would set it to auto, but also set the limit. So for this camera, I would say set the limit between 100 and either 3200 or 6400 as you're just shooting on your day-to-day basis. We have our metering mode where you want it to take that exposure from. So we have evaluative, center, and spot. We have flash mode for when you do have a flash on top of the camera. Your white balance, which is also one of the controls on top. Your creative style, which is how it takes in color. So you have standard, which is what I recommend you leave it on. You have vivid, black and white, sepia. Those are all going to kind of adjust the color on your photograph. And keep in mind, if you're taking it on RAW, it's not going to matter what you shoot it in. It's going to save it as kind of that standard option. So it's something to keep in mind. You have your stabilization that's built into the camera, your steady shot, which you can turn on and off. Your file format, which I like to shoot in RAW, but you can also shoot in RAW and JPEG, or just JPEG if you would like. And you can prioritize your record media. So if you want the default to be slot 1 or slot 2, depending on what you're shooting to, you can prioritize that as well. And then you have your mode dial option there, which is just this here. Now again, these are all customizable. If you go to your quick menu setting, it shouldn't be an issue changing any of these. So because a lot of these are already programmed to your custom buttons, or they're already laid out on the camera, or maybe you find that you won't change them often, you can actually change those to be whatever you want as well in your quick menu. So something to keep in mind. We have our display button, which changes our display here. So this is going to be a more simple option where you just get battery, your mode, your ISO, what the exposure is at, your f-stop, and your shutter speed, the more basic options. We have a histogram option here. We have our level option here. We have just information, so no picture. And then we have this one here, which allows you to picture, but also gives you a lot of information. So essentially everything on your quick menu, along with how many pictures you can take. So currently I can take 1,255 pictures on my card in slot 1 at the raw ability. But personally, I just like this mode here. It's simple. I can see the picture when I have a lens on it. It gives me my battery power and all the basics I need. We have our playback button here, which of course I don't have any images in the card at the moment, so it's actually not going to show me much. But if I did want to delete any pictures, I could just hit the trash can button here, and it's going to delete any ones that I don't like. Now we're going to go ahead and get into the menu. So here we go through the menu. Now you'll find that I will skip over quite a bit of these, and the reason I'll skip over some of these is because not only is it laid out on your camera, but there are some of them that you don't really need to know. It's, you know, something that would be for somebody that's very specifically shooting it for a specific reason. If that does come up and you do want to know more about it, please let me know in the comments below. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. So as you can see in tab 1, this guy is going to be more dedicated toward actual photographs. So we have file format, whether or not you want it compressed in camera or not, your JPEG quality, if you're shooting in JPEG, you have your aspect ratio, which is just kind of the size that you kind of want the photo cropped to. You have your APS-C, so if you do put a crop sensor lens on this, it will work, but keep in mind it's going to cut down the megapixels like in half, so that is something to keep in mind. Long exposure noise reduction, I would personally have this off if you plan on editing your pictures, because I find that the long exposure noise reduction, I find that that noise reduction option in editing is a little bit more in your control. Plus it takes a little bit longer to take another picture because it's going through removing some of that noise for you. I would keep the color space on sRGB. We have self timer type, bracketing settings, interval shooting settings, all that you can access when it comes to that timer on the dial up here on the top of the camera. You have your memory recall, going through select media. You have your custom shooting setting, which is going to be that 1, 2, and 3 on the mode dial. You have your priority set for autofocus single or autofocus continuous. Personally, I would just kind of leave that be. Focus area, so again, you can access that through your quick menu, focus settings, autofocus illuminator, which is that LED in the front that I told you guys about, face eye autofocus settings, so if you want it set to animal or human, or if you want it to frame the face and eye, that's all customizable as well. Autofocus tracking, aperture drive, a lot of these you'll find that you're not going to change, which is fine. Autofocus area registration, I wouldn't worry about that either. Focus frame color, so what this means is that when you're manually focusing, you can either have that frame turn red or white. Personally, I think red is a little bit easier to see, especially when you're shooting on a bright day, and that'll show you exactly where it's focusing, which is nice. See, you have phase area detection. A lot of these I just would not worry about, at least not right away. You have your exposure compensation, which again is the dial here. Resetting it, ISO setting, your metering mode, all of these are accessible through your quick menu currently, or you can set them there. We have different flash modes, connected with a wireless flash. You got red eye reduction. Again, white balance, you have HDR, your creative style. Focus magnifier, this will help you when you're manually focusing your lens, because what it'll do is it'll magnify a certain part of the picture, and it'll allow you to see if something's really in focus, which can be really difficult on such a small screen. We have anti-flicker shooting, face registration, so you can actually register faces and places in the camera for it to remember those and remember those people, which I think is kind of weird, but that's just me. The second tab is going to be specifically for video, which you'll find that a lot of the settings are the same as tab 1, just more video dedicated. So as you can see, we have file format, we have record settings, your slow and quick settings, autofocus during the movie, audio level display. Something I would change is your audio record level on page 2. I found that with my Sony, I had to turn that down quite a bit, probably to about 5 or 6. That way I didn't peg out when it came to my decibels on audio, so something to keep in mind. We also have like shutter steady shot, so if you wanted to turn off your stabilization and you didn't want it in your quick menu, you actually find that on tab 2 on page 5. You can also change settings. I would honestly put the release without card, I would disable that. And the reason I would disable that is because if you're anything like me, who is someone that forgets to bring a card, and you go and you start taking pictures, it's not going to tell you that it doesn't have a card in it, and it's not saving any of your images until you go back and press that play button and it goes, sorry, didn't have a card in there, and then, you know, you're screwed. So at least with the release without a card being disabled, it's going to tell you right away, I don't have a card in here. So then you shouldn't have an issue. We have zoom settings here, the display button, your finder or monitor. If you wanted to change the frame rate or the brightness, you can set a grid line to help you with your composition, help you with your balance. Live view display, continuous shooting length. I mean, auto review if you wanted to see the picture for how long. I think it's like 2 seconds, 5 seconds, and 10-second options, or else you can just turn it off and look back at your pictures later. You can change your custom keys, both on the playing back on your pictures, on video mode, and taking your picture modes. They can do different things in those 3 different functions. You can change your function menu set, your dial settings. These are all kind of your custom operations that you can change yourself. The little world here is going to be our wireless menu. This is where you'll be able to send pictures to your smartphone, transfer to a computer, use your computer as a remote, which is really interesting. My recommendation is that if you're not using any of these wireless settings right away, I would turn on your airplane mode to help you save battery, because it does drain battery when you don't have the airplane mode on. So something to keep in mind. And then when you want to transfer your pictures to your computer or your phone, you can go ahead and turn the airplane mode off. But this is where you're going to find your Wi-Fi settings. You can edit your device name if you want to customize that. You have your playback menu, which is going to protect, rotate, delete. You can add a voice memo to pictures. You can copy your picture, enlarge an image. You can do a slideshow straight from the camera. Image index to kind of see, a selection of the photos that you got going on. And then we have our toolbox here, which is going to be general setup. This is going to be your monitor brightness, viewfinder brightness, your volume settings when you're playing back video, delete confirmation, which is really neat. I would always put the cancel first, just in case. Power save start time, which is really handy because naturally mirrorless does run battery quite a bit. So having it set to a start time when you haven't been using it for 1 minute to kind of go into a sleep mode is perfect. Auto power off for temperature, standard is, is what I would keep it on. You have cleaning mode for when you need that sensor cleaned, your touch operation, your touch pad, any of those. Infrared remote control, that little sensor I showed you in the front, you can turn that on or off. Your HDMI settings, your USB settings, your language if you want to change that, date and time, copyright info, the serial number, formatting your card. Formatting your card is something that I always like to cover in my videos. Formatting is extremely important if you're not the type of person to just save an SD card and go and buy another one when you need it. What's great about formatting your card is it resets the card to how you purchased it. It permanently erases everything for you to start over new. This actually is really healthy to do for your card every now and then. And the reason that is because if you just go through and you use the trash can every time to delete all your pictures and retake pictures on a clean card, what happens is that when you use this trash can, it's deleting the visible file, but it's still keeping the data. So it's allowing that data to be overwritten by a new picture. And when you do that over and over and over and over again, that can actually cause corruption. It can cause your cards to lock up. So it's really good that every now and then, if you get back from a trip or you do a certain job or something like that, that you do a certain job or something like that, that you actually go in and format your card before you go out and take some new photos. It'll just help keep your future memories safer. And then from here you can select, like, add a new folder to save photos to if you want to separate them, file folder settings, file settings. You can see your firmware version to see if it needs to be updated, save and load settings. You can reset your settings. So if you are playing with this, you did something funny, your camera's doing something funky, and you have no idea how to change it, you can always just reset your settings back to factory. And then you have your My Menu tab. So what this is you can actually pick and choose, again, another thing to customize, anything from tab 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and add them to your My Menu settings so you know exactly where to find them. So if you don't want them on the outside of your camera, or maybe you didn't have enough room on the outside of your camera to have things readily available, you can just add them to the My Menu setting. That way you don't have to go digging through all of those pages I just went through, and you just have the ones that are most important to you in your My Menu setting. So it is pretty neat how much you can customize these cameras, but of course it is a lot to consider as well. Other than that, that pretty much sums up the A9 Mark II. And the lens review when it comes to the Sony G Master versus Tamron. You know, for me, it's really rough because as a Sony shooter, I want to be future-proofed for the foreseeable future because I don't see myself going away from Sony. So the G Master is a nice guarantee for that, but I am a huge fan of Tamron. The fact that it's lighter, it's smaller, it's more travel friendly, and it's half the price. I mean, I'll let you guys, you know, decide for yourselves naturally on, you know, kind of the direction you guys want to go. But if you guys have any questions, if you guys want to know more about something in the menu or something about the camera or something about the lenses, or maybe you have a completely different set of lenses you want me to review, let me know in the comments below. I'd be happy to add those to my list. And as always, keep your eye out for inspiration, Shutterbugs. Bye.